The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 38th Day. The famous investiture controversy, sustained between Gregory VII and Henry IV, between the priestly sword and the volitional sword, would be renewed now by Boniface VIII and Philip IV. But where the first had triumphed before, now would be imposed the second, with all the weight that can release the absolute truth over the essential lie. Times had changed, and it was not about a struggle between the priest of the cult and the king of the blood anymore, in which the first was ahead because it dominated the culture through the religion and the organized church, while the second lacked from the necessary strategic orientation to enforce the charismatic power of the pure blood. With Philip IV, the Ghibellines were before an initiated king, who opposed them in terms of strategies, that is to say, in the context of an essential war. The priest of the cult and the cultural pact, against the king of the blood, and the pact of blood. The synarchic culture, against the strategic manner of life. The Ghibelline Pope Boniface VIII, and the theocratic concept of the world government, against the king of the pure blood, Philip IV, and the concept of the mystical nation. The plans of the white fraternity, against the Hyperborean wisdom. Yes, Dr. Sentinel, this time the complaint was proposed in the plane of two total strategies, and its resolution would imply the total defeat of one of the adversaries, that is to say, the impossibility to comply with their strategic objectives. But, as it was about the strategy of the potencies of the matter, against the strategy of the eternal spirit, represented by Boniface VIII and Philip IV, would not be difficult to predict who would win. That was better synthesized by Pierre Flet, a lord of the dog, who was minister of Philip the Fair. When Boniface affirmed, for being the Pope, I wield the two swords, and he answered, it is true, Holy Father, but were your swords just a theory, the ones of my king are a reality. In October of 1294, many French provincial synods were gathered to discuss about the help that the king claimed to solve the war against England. Many approved the transference for 2 years of an extraordinary tithe, but the majority of the orders protested to the Vatican. And here can be said that started one of the most fruitful divisions in the bosom of the Church. The French bishops, in great number, went on by the national mystic, and they felt charismatically inclined to support Philip the Fair. On the other hand, the Ghibelline Church, represented in France by the Benedictine orders, that's to say, the Congregation of Cluny, the Cistercian order, and the Templar order, are fiercely opposed to the pretensions of Philip IV. It is the abbot of the Citos who raised to Boniface VIII the most virulent claims. After the General Assembly of 1226, in which it compared the servile bishops, who accepted to pay taxes, with the dumb dogs of the sacred writing, meanwhile the king is equated to the pharaoh. Such difference, that in that moment was quite exaggerated, divided the Church of France in two sides. In the side of the king were aligned the nationalist bishops, some of the lords of the dog, although the majority were composed by simple patriots who feared privately a confrontation with the Holy See. Philip IV would not neglect them, assuring in every case the real protection against any reprisal that their behavior could produce. Also the University of Paris, the most prestigious school of canon law of Europe, was divided. There, apart from the issue of the tax reform, was still debated about the legality of the election of Boniface VIII, being many the canonists, who considered Celestine V as the real pope. The measures of Philip IV, and the strategic movements of the Dominicanes, would tend to consolidate the unity of that side, to agglutinate them around a king of the blood, and to oppose them against Boniface VIII. In the other side, the one of the Gallican Church, properly said, headed by Boniface VIII, were grouped the enemies of the mystical nation, that's to say, the followers of the internal and external enemy, the Gallican orders, and their secret center, the College of Temple Constructors. For Philip IV, and in this manner would be exposed in the process to the Templars, from that secret societies was being elaborated a plot destined to debilitate the monarchies in favor of a world government. Against the satanic side, still enough powerful as to try a last defense at the plans of the wide fraternity, Philip IV should smite with all the force of his volitional sword, trying at the same time that the hit would respond to the highest Hyperborean strategy. Boniface VIII doesn't lose more time. He decides to apply over the King of France, and in an extensive form to all who dare to imitate him, the universal prestige of the Catholic Church. From this prestige appears the principle of obedience to the papal authority, which until then no one dared to disobey without suffering severe punishments in his religious condition, when not to punishments of more concrete order. The call of a crusade, to safeguard the Catholic religion, convoked the most fervent adherents, put in movement thousands of faithfuls, and it was only about a papal mandate, of an order obeyed for the respect to the holy investiture of his transmitter. Would not be, then, the right moment to apply such prestige over that insurgent kinglet, who dared to intervene in the centennial plans of the Gallican Church? But Boniface VIII had not warned, when he evaluated the force of such prestige, the recent loss of Holy Land, neither the frustrated crusade against Aragon, nor the Aragonese presence in Sicily, nor the extreme weakness that the war against Swabia had produced in the German kingdom, nor the almost existence of the empire, except for the title that was still conferred to the German kingdoms, etc. None of these things he warned, and he decided to compete with Philip IV, through the bull Clericis Laicos, of February 24, of 1296. On it was prohibited, under excommunication penalty, to all the secular princes to demand or receive extraordinary subsides of the clergy. Clerics for their part, had prohibited to pay them, unless under authorization in contradiction of the Holy See, under the same excommunication penalty. Until such point to the absurd that a bishop ran a risk to be excommunicated, not only for falling in heresy, but also for paying a tax. You won't miss, Dr. Setonal, the Judaic connotations that are behind such greedy and avaricious mentality. The reaction of Philip V was consequent. He gathered in France an assembly of bishops to debate the bull Clericis Laicos, in which he accused, who obeyed, to not contribute in the defense of the kingdom and being, therefore, liable under the charges of treason. The Roman law was opposed, already, against the canon law. He sent some loyal bishops and ministers to Rome to treat the issue with the Pope, while in secrecy, animated the colonnade to strengthen the Ghibelline party. But, apart from these measures, he made something much more effective. In August 17, he promulgated an edict in which he prohibited the exportation of gold and silver of the Kingdom of France. Other royal edict prohibited to the Italian bankers, who operated in France, to accept funds destined to the Pope. In this manner the Pope remained deprived to receive the ecclesiastical rents from the Church of France, included his own feuds. Boniface VIII, of course, not expected such strike from the French king. Philip IV had exposed the new situation to the people through sides, libels and assemblies, convoked to the effect. And he had skillfully exposed it, in such way that the Church of Rome appeared as indifferent before the necessity of the French nation, as interested only egoistically on its rents, while the nation had to mobilize all its resources to face an exterior war, was pretended to make the accept passively, under excommunication penalty, that the clergy directed important rents to Rome. These arguments justified before the people and the estates the royal edict, and predisposed to everyone against the papal bull, unanimously was requested to Philip IV, to disobey the clericis laicos, which content, according to the secular legists, was manifestly perverse, due to, it obeyed the king to miss the laws of his kingdom. To Boniface VIII, whose love for the gold was hand in hand with his fanaticism for the Gallican cause, the deprivation for such rents meant little less than a physical mutilation, especially when he had news that the English King Edward I was imitating the measures of Philip, concerning to the exaction of ecclesiastics' tithes, and now was preparing to disobey also that clericis laicos and to commandeer the totality of the rents of the church. The pain of Boniface VIII will be better understood if we observe the amounts of the in question. Italy contributed with 500,000 guilders of gold, in papal tithes, England with 600,000, and France, that was retaining a part destined to the crusade against Aragon, 200,000. It was about a guilder, that for nothing in the world could be renounced. For what needed Boniface VIII, such quantities? In part to finance the war with which he wanted to break the Ghiberlang fence, that had been developing in Italy, where was still missing the Sicilian issue, and in part to enrich himself and his family, due to, Benedict Gaetani, was gifted with perfection of the features of the boundless ambitious, the unscrupulous climber, the corrupt tyrant. Worthy of these examples, when he acceded to the papacy he immediately annulled the laws and decrees of Nicholas IV, and Celestine V, that benefited the colonies, transferring the titles in favor of his own familiars. The King Charles II obtained for his nephew the title of Count of Caorte, and many feuds, for the sons of him, of the Earl of Palazzo, and Earl of Fondi. For himself, he seized from the old palace of the Emperor Octavian, converted then in the military force of Rome, which he restored and rebuilt magnificently, employing for it the money of the church. Same procedure continued with other castles and fortresses of Campania and Maremma, and all passed to integrate his personal patrimony. He possessed palaces, in Rome, Rieti and Orvieto, his habitual residences, although, the most beautiful and luxurious was undoubtedly the one of his natal city of Anagni, where he passed most part of the year. So he lived in an environment of splendor and luxury, that was in nothing coherent with his condition of leading of the church, that exalts the salvation of the soul by the practice of the humility and poverty. He lacked of scruples, to concede charges and favors in exchange for money, that is to say, he was Simeoniac. He put his own money out of the church, interchangeably, in hands of the Lombard, or Templar bankers, to be borrowed at usurer interest. He lacked of any piety when it was treating about to reach his purposes, quality that he demonstrated in first instance when he ordered the assassination of Celestine V, and then confirmed the bloody persecutions of the Ghibellines, that he unleashed in Italy. And to complete this profile of his sinister personality, perhaps, be enough with a last example. As every Gallican, Boniface VIII had affection to the ritual sodomy. Of course, just as the Gallians had not disposed of a king of the height of Philip IV, to oppose him, neither they disposed of a Saint Bernard, to seat in the pontifical throne. Benedict Gaetani was the best they had, and to him they entrusted the execution of their strategy. And the best strategy seemed to be, before the toughness and courage of Philip IV, to go back one step and prepare to advance two. In other words, would be attempted to calm the king, mitigating the sense of the bull Clericis Laicos, through other bull, Ineffabilis Emery, in September 21st, of 1296, and they will dedicate by all the possible available means of the church to end with the Ghibelline threat, and Italy and Sicily. And concerning to the pretext of the war with England, brandished by the King of France to justify his exactions, he would be neutralized, obeying the parts to pact the peace. Pure logic. Without war, the king would have not motives to demand taxes nor contributions to the clergy. The Ineffabilis Emery is followed by the bulls Reminameter Ecclesia and Novatis, in which it threatens the king with excommunication, manifesting the total approval of the tithes, only when the kingdom be really in danger. But what stands out in all of them is the arrogance with which is directed to the king, to whom he considers a mere minion. These bulls would raise a wave of indignation in France, due to it they were openly read by order of the king, and they would predispose, even more, the French bishops against papal intransigence. They were who gathered in an assembly in Paris and asked to the Pope, in February the 1st of 1297, the authorization to subsidize Philip IV, which was facing at the time the treason of the Earl of Flanders. He, in fact, had allied with the King of England, who was trying to recover the Guyenne, and was threatening the north of France. Boniface VIII must yield before the facts and authorize the contributions, leaving the clericis laicos in dead letter. In April of 1297, Boniface sent to Paris the Cardinals Elbano and Prenestit, carrying a new bull. On it he ordained to the monarchs in conflict the establishment of a one-year truce, while the definitive treaty of peace is being arranged. The negotiation would be in charge of the Pope. Philip received them, but, before to permit the reading of the rescript, he made the following warning. Tell to the Pope, that is our conviction that only to the King corresponds to command in the kingdom. That we the King of France, and we don't recognize the competence of anyone above us, to intervene in the matters of the kingdom. That the King of England, and the Count of Flanders, are vassals of the King of France, and that we do not accept other advice than the voice of the honor, to treat our subjects. The bull was read, but Philip did not respond until June of 1298, when the fate of the weapons was adverse before the united forces of England and Flanders. Then he accepted the arbitration of Boniface VIII, but not in quality of Pope, but only as benedictine. Thus, he avoided to admit the papal jurisdiction in the matters of the kingdom. Meanwhile, the controversy about the legitimacy of Boniface VIII continued more alive than ever. In France, the Lords of the Dog were in charge to update the debate, while in Italy, the agitation ran by account of the colonnades. The preference for Boniface VIII, or Pope Celestine V, had been transformed there in synonym of gloves, or Ghibellingers. The colonnade, receiving secret help from Philip IV, and now the allies of the King Frederick of Sicily, son of Peter III, of Aragon and Constance of Swabia, were present in the view of the Pope, as the staunchest candidates for a Ghibelline vendetta. They just needed a chance, and this one appeared when the anger of Stephen Colonna took him to assault a papal caravan that was carrying the pontifical treasure, from Menetna to Rome. Stephen Colonna had not acted with the intention to rob, but, with the certainty of rescuing the goods of the church, which were in power of usurper. For this reason he carried the treasure at the light of the day to his castle of Polstreen. The lesson that Boniface VIII would apply to the colonnade and the Ghibellingers, it would be exemplary, although characteristic of the Ghibelline mentality. First he presented the act of Sire Colonna to the people of Rome as an indescribable crime, for which he blamed his entire lineage. The Cardinal Pedro is the chief of the Ghibellingers, and both he and the Cardinal Jacob were guilty for the 2 years retardation of the papal election in Perugia. Now, another member of that family dares to revolt against the authority of the Pope, the highest of the universe, and dares to steal this treasure. That accursed lineage must be banished from the Church. The proclamation of the illegality of Boniface VIII, by the colonnades, was in vain. Their contributions in the accusations about the doubts that the University of Paris sustained about the resignation of the Pope Celestine V, or the request of information of a General Council of the Church, to utter on the case. In less than a month, and with the approval of the Sacred College, the Cardinals Jacopo and Peter were excommunicated and deposed, as well as Juan Colonna and his sons, Agapito, Jacopo, and Stephen Sciarra. In addition of taking them away from the Church and Christianity, in the bull, is ordained to confiscate their goods, properties and titles. Naturally, the colonnades resisted, and Boniface replied, publishing a crusade. All who take part of it will get the same dispenses that if they had gone to Holy Land. With the pass of the Crusaders, the Ghibellines, massacres are renewed in all Italy. The castle of Sciarra, in Palestrine, is taken and, by order of Boniface, reduced to rubble, the ground ploughed, and covered with salt. Sciarra, and the rest of the colonies, must flee to France, completely ruined. Then was the turn of the spiritual Franciscans. According to another bull, the Holy Office found their doctrines heretical and ordained the dissolution of the order.